I'm Sally Penni. I'm a barrister. I'm the founder of Women in the Law UK. Michael, we're so delighted to have his expertise again because we really, really learn a lot from him. So I'm going to hand over, and just as a caveat, I suppose, I have a lot of friends at business schools who are, really teaching the real work. And if you speak to them about, where is the place to do in an MBA or what have you, one of my friends who works at Manchester, because Manchester Business School is like one of the top 10. She said, "Oh, Saeed, Oxford Saeed," no doubt. So I'm really delighted that we've got Michael, who's an associate fellow of Saeed, here to teach us about cross-culture leading across cross cultures. So, Michael, over to you.
Great. So let's go ahead. And I was thinking about how this topic, leading across cultures, would apply to people in the legal profession. And one of the things that I thought of was, obviously, if you're involved in an international case and working in partnership with a foreign law firm who have the local expertise, then that could be one way. But then also within the UK itself, and both in law firms and in, as we heard from one of the participants in the pharmaceutical industry, you can have a lot of diversity within an organization. And although I'm talking mainly about national culture, the culture like that is also an emblem for any sort of difference between people. People who have different beliefs and values, people who communicate in a different way. So I thought I'd just position it a little bit like that. But I'd like you to get into doing something right at the beginning, so I get some ideas about some of the challenges you may have had. And I'm going to put you into two groups just for 5 minutes, so you don't have long, but just to talk about any cross-cultural misunderstandings you may have had, either in your work, and as I mentioned, could be with diverse cultures in the UK, or socially on holiday, any cultural clashes you've had. So I'll put you in these groups, 5 minutes, and then we'll come back and get into the topic a little bit more. Okay, everyone back?
Yes.
So any comments from the first room? So who was in the first room? Helen.
Yeah, we were just talking about it from the perspective of being inclusive to all cultures, religions, beliefs, and just the way people are. So we were talking about having had, we do quite a lot socially because we're really trying to keep the team feeling like a team, despite the fact that everybody's sat in their respective houses. So we had a team social yesterday, which was online escape rooms. And what we did was we sent a little treat pack out to everybody in advance. But we made sure avenues were covered in terms of alcoholic, non-alcoholic, what might be in the treats, just to make sure that everybody feels included, because it's the kind of thing that nobody would ever do intentionally, but sometimes, particularly younger organisers of these kind of social events, it's just off the radar of thinking, well, my enjoyment would be to have a glass of wine while I'm doing that, or a glass of Prosecco or whatever, and not necessarily take account that there are other cultures and beliefs and a significant number of pregnant ladies within the teams.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Helen. Esme, anything that you'd like to say?
I was just saying to the ladies that the only thing I could think of was when you say, "Oh, I was born in Africa," and people assume you're either Nigerian or Ghanaian, and they immediately just put you in that group and don't think about the other 56 or 54 countries that you could come from in Africa. So that was the only thing I could think about.
Okay, great. Thanks, Esme. Thanks, Rita.
Yes, we were very similar, talking a lot about inclusion and belonging as well, Michael. Personally, I can't think of any misunderstandings that I have experienced myself, although I've seen plenty around me, and I've taken cues and learned from them as well. But one thing I've always in my professional career been interested in doing is knowing, how to approach teamwork and professional relationships. So, for example, in a day I could be working with Turkish colleagues, Norwegian colleagues, Kuwaiti colleagues, Saudi colleagues, how Japanese colleagues. So it's just nice to know, how to approach those relationships to first of all be, as I say, so that everybody feels like they belong to the same team and they're pulling in the same direction, but also be effective in what we have to deliver as well.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Rita.
Yeah, no, my view was that we have these a lot in the court system, people from different cultures coming to give evidence. And they're misunderstood, not just in the witness box, but by the time they reach me, I'm fairly good, if I might say. But there's been all sorts of misunderstandings from what they're offered to eat for a lunch to, what languages they speak, to what happens in the courtroom when they're taking the oath. They often give the wrong oath because nobody's asked them actually what oath is there. So that there's a lot that happens, and on the boards that certainly I sit on, one of the boards that's in Silicon Valley, and they were laughing in my group because I said often when the Americans start with a polite, how are you? We English literally take it literally and go on and say, oh, the weather's this, and the traffic's that, and what have you. And before you get into any actual business or dating contract, you've lost half the time because they're not interested. They're like, yeah, how are you? Upbeat, especially Californians. Yeah, and so on and so forth. So it's I have seen that a lot. But Maria's point about inclusion is an important one, because that also, you can't do any business or deal with any other lawyers if you don't consider and think ahead about who you're negotiating with. Who's the judge you're going to appear in front of? What are they like? And same with when you're dealing with negotiations or whatever else. So it's quite an interesting topic. I think often we think, oh, it doesn't apply to us in the law. Or we say, oh, we've never experienced it. But as Sir Helen's just demonstrated, simple things like, alcoholic, we're not giving consideration to the women in the team, or the Muslim women. How many dinners did we go to where actually the reception drink, none of our dinners, mocktails for a lot of our Asian colleagues, and so on. Yes, that's all I had to say on the issue.
Good, thanks, Sally. Okay, well, thank you for all that. And one of the things I want to focus on today in the short time we do have is, of course, we're talking about leadership, but leadership is... Of course, we're talking about leadership. I'm getting an echo there. Could you turn your mic off, whoever's got it on? So we're talking about leadership, but obviously one of the keys to leadership is how you communicate. And George Bernard Shaw said, the biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it's taken place. So we may think that we've communicated something, or we may think we've understood something, but in fact we haven't understood it or communicated it at all. And when things are going well, it's not really a problem. Where it becomes a challenge is when we have to disagree. And, in any sort of working life, at some point we have to disagree. And different cultures tend to do it in different ways. So, Germans have a tendency, if they disagree, to just say, I disagree or I don't agree. And it's funny, when I've shown this a few times and I've had a German in the group, in the audience, the number of times that I've put this up and one of the Germans has said, I disagree with that. Because they don't realize that they're doing it in such a direct way. Whereas the English, particularly, not so much the north of England, but southern English, if we really disagree with someone, we may say something like, that's a very interesting idea, which actually means, you're talking nonsense. The French, well, for the French, logic is very important. And so if they disagree with you, they may say something like, I do not see the logic in your argument. If you listen to the French, even if they're speaking English, they use the word logic a lot. They're speaking French, it's almost the same word. So, c'est logique, ce n'est pas logique. And they use this a lot. My article or the chapter that I've written for Sally, I'm talking very much about the difference between British pragmatism and French logic. Americans, you got to be kidding, particularly New York Americans. And Brazilian, well, the relationship's really important. Let's go and have a caipirinha and talk about it tomorrow. Where I live in Finland, how do people disagree? Well, quite often it's silence. So if you're a leader and you're leading a multicultural group, then think not only about how you communicate your message and try and tailor it to the other people, but then also think about what people are actually saying and what does that silence mean. And I liked Sally's example about the Americans saying, how you doing? Well, with the Brits, maybe we say a little bit, but not too much. In Finland, I've had the strangest experiences with that greeting. Right in my first week here back in 1987, I said hello to the PA in the office, young Finnish lady, and it was first thing on a Monday morning. I said, "How are you today?" And she looked at me and said, "I have diarrhea." Well, I didn't really want to know that. I had another occasion where I asked someone how they were, how are you today? And after a long pause, she looked at me quite scornfully and said, "You asked me that last week." So for her, it was a different type of question. How do we communicate? But where does culture come from? If you go back thousands of years, why are cultures different? And we'll do a quick poll here. I know we've only got a few of us, but we'll see what we come up with. So I'll start the poll, and what I'd like you to do is answer, what do you personally think is the most important origin of culture? And you can only choose one. There's no right or wrong answer. I'm just interested what people come up with. So, yeah, okay. And I'll show you the results in a moment. So one person's voted. If you can try and vote, please. Language. Half of you have voted. For another one. 5. Just one more person to vote. Maybe you can't do it for some reason. So we'll have a look at the result. So we had quite a spread there. If I look at the results there, can someone tell me? Can you see the results now?
Yes, we can.
You can see them, yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Good. So quite a spread there. I'm surprised no one chose climate. History was the most important. I mean, where I live, because of winters in the past, if you didn't get the harvest in by the end of the winter, you wouldn't survive. Or by the end of the autumn, rather, you wouldn't survive the winter. And so it's very important to plan. And, Nordics tend to plan ahead quite a lot. Someone put other. If you put other, can you say what you meant by other, what you thought? Whoever put other.
Oh, that was me. Sorry. I didn't think it was any specific, climate, whatever, language, religion. I think it's more a mix.
Right. So that's what you meant. Yeah, and I think that's right. It all of them have some sort of influence. Thanks, Nez. Thanks. So if you could put your videos on, so I can, because it helps if I can see you, if that's okay. How do we get our own culture? Who gives it to us? Anyone?
I think it's our life experiences and how that shapes us probably as individuals, and then multiplying that in a community, perhaps.
Yeah. So what shapes us in individuals are life experiences, and particularly early on, our early experiences. Our parents, I think, give us culture. And I'm going to show you an advertisement. And this is an advertisement for bread, and it's from where I live. I'll have to translate just a couple of words in it because it's in Finnish. And what sort of person do you think would emerge from this culture? It's a little boy and his father, and have a look at it and think, well, what is it? What cultural lesson or lessons are being taught here? Would it work in your culture? Would it work, for example, in the UK or wherever you're all from originally, or your origins? So have a look at it here.
No onko sulla nälkä vai ei?
So what the father says is, are you hungry or not? The caption there says, as hard as life.
Aito, oululaisen jälkiuneleipä. Nyt myös kätevinä paloina.
And the voiceover at the end says, you can also buy this bread ready sliced. So, what sort of feelings did that advert inspire in you, or not inspire? Helen?
Yeah, not particularly. I'm a bit worried about the kid cutting his finger, and then he's licked his finger and put it all over the bread.
Well, we're more sensitive to that these days, aren't we?
Yeah, it just seemed a bit dreary, didn't it?
Yeah, a bit dreary. Maria, what did you think?
Yeah, it was a bit depressing. I wondered what it was leading to. It was all very dark and dismal, and yeah.
Yeah, I remember the first time I showed it in India, and my Indian group, I didn't even tell them where it was from. I said, what do you think about this culture? And one of my Indians said, these people have no compassion, no feelings. Well, I think the father does have feelings, but he's trying to restrain them. It's a sort of lesson for life. And what is the lesson that the boy is supposed to be learning there, would you say?
That little bit brought up so many feelings and reactions in me. But yes, life is hard and you'll have to go it alone.
Yeah, life's hard. You've got to go it alone. You've got to persevere in order to succeed.
Yes.
Now, the Finns find this advertisement very humorous. First of all, when I've asked them what they say they feel proud to be so tough, such a tough people. And then because it's in exaggeration, they find it quite humorous. And especially when it says you can also get it ready sliced. If you're a leader, how would you lead? Imagine that little boy has then grown up and he's in his 30s or whatever, and you've got to lead him. What sort of person will he be to lead? To what extent would you micromanage him? And this culture, they hate being micromanaged. Some cultures like micromanagement. They want people, the boss, to check up on them. And so all those things, one has to take into consideration. This picture, this is my little son a few years ago. And I was once in my kitchen at home, and I looked round and he was doing that with a big knife. And I just turned around and carried on working. And then I caught myself and I thought, gosh, have I become like the Finns now? How would my mother have reacted if I had a knife like that? She would have probably started screaming, and grabbing it off me. So to what extent does the culture that we live in affect us? So I just ignored it and carried on. And the challenge with culture is that it's like an iceberg. Or one of the challenges, that we see things on the surface, and those things might be like the food that people eat, what are the arts like, what fashions are people wearing, what films are they watching. And one thing that sometimes people say to me is, aren't cultures all becoming the same? I would say on the surface, there's a lot of similarity. But if you don't know what's underneath, then that can really come to hit you hard once it appears. And it tends to appear when things are getting difficult. And so as you go below, we do communicate in different ways. And what does that mean? Do we find the person that we're communicating with rude? Maybe they're not being rude. They think they're being honest. Do we find that we don't understand our counterpart? And then we start not to trust them. And, we might not understand them because they're speaking indirectly. Why are they speaking indirectly? Because they want to protect our face, but we don't care about our face as much as they do. And all these things get in the way. Use of space and time. Do you like eye contact, strong eye contact? Does it make you trust the person? Or do you find strong eye contact sort of overbearing and threatening? And how close do you want people to come to you? Of course, these days, none of us can come very close. But where I live in Finland, when they announced that it was going to be 2 meters that you had to keep away from other people, one of my Finnish colleagues said, does that mean that I can come closer than usual? Because they're a culture like the Japanese. Of course, in Japan, you can't avoid getting close to people, but they would much prefer to be further away from people naturally. And then what are our values, behaviors, taboos? And all that is under the surface. And so culture hides more than it reveals. And it hides most effectively from its own participants. So the hardest culture sometimes to understand is actually our own culture. Now, if we look at a particular culture, here we've got the UK. We've put this diagram together through asking many people to describe themselves, excuse me, from the UK. In the middle, we've got things which Brits tend to have in common, based on us asking many people in surveys. At the bottom, there are things which are common to humankind, to any culture. So, wherever people are from, they tend to love their young, they're angry at injustice, want to be liked, and grateful for favors. And then there's what we call individual deviants. Those are just people who are very different from what the norm is in their culture. But in the middle, we've got a few things. Think about your own culture. You may not be typical. You may have many features which are rather different. Think about the culture of the people that you're trying to lead and try and build bridges where you find areas of commonality. So, for example, if I look at this one, and on the British one, we've got a compromiser. The French tend not to believe in compromise. They tend to believe in finding the absolute truth. Compromise is a lot of people agreeing to something that no one really agrees to. So that wouldn't be good common ground between the French and the Brits, but there could be many other areas where there is some common ground. And of course, it's dangerous to stereotype because we're talking about groups of people. But a stereotype, it's like a working hypothesis. But you've got to be careful. First of all, try and be accurate. And it's not always easy. What does accuracy mean? Because we may believe we're being accurate in our depiction of another culture, but in fact, we're not being accurate at all. We're basing it on our limited experience. I'll give you an example. Recently, I was working with a group of Brits, and we were talking about India. And I said, come up with the first thing that you can think of to describe Indians. And one guy put his hand up and he said, oh yeah, Indians are very pessimistic. I said, well, I'm very surprised. I've worked for years in India. I've worked with lots of Indians in the UK, and I would say they're some of the most optimistic people I've ever met. And in fact, statistics show that there was a survey done in 2017 where people were asked in many countries, do you think next year will be better for you personally than this year? And 83% of Indians said it would, compared to 39% of Japanese. I said, what's your basis? I said, how many Indians have you known? He said, one. And he was really miserable. So people have a tendency to generalize from limited experience. Use generalizations consciously, be descriptive rather than evaluative, be prepared to modify them, and use it as a first best guess. And there has been a lot of research done into this. And what I would say as a leader is that obviously it's important to get to know individuals. But before you know those individuals, I mean, imagine you've just been given a new team with people from different cultures. Before you know those individuals, it's a sort of a use of probability or game theory to sort of guess what is likely, but then be prepared to modify. And one experiment was a very famous one done about 10, 15 years ago. And thousands of people from many different countries were asked the same situational question. And the question was this: imagine that you're in a car and your best friend is driving. Your best friend is going too fast. She goes through a red light, hits a pedestrian going across the road, and the pedestrian is injured quite seriously. There were no cameras, no police. When the police arrive, they discover that you were the only witness, and it's your best friend. So then it goes to court. What are you going to do? Are you going to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Or are you going to tell a few white lies to protect your friend? Now, I'm not asking you to answer this, but what cultures globally do you think were the ones that were most likely to say, I'd tell the truth? Even if it's my best friend, I don't care. I'm just going to tell the truth and say it was her fault.
I don't know why I want to say this, Michael, but people from New Zealand, I think they're some of the most honest people. So perhaps them. And
yeah, I haven't got. I don't think they asked people from New Zealand, but I would agree with you. You know, my biggest client is in New Zealand, so I go there a lot. Well, I used to until last year. And yeah, they are very direct and honest. Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah. Do we have something in the chat? Any other countries that you think would tell the truth or say that they tell the truth? Well, someone here has said the French. Not exactly the French. And you bring up an interesting point, because I was talking about the logic of the French, and the French are logical in one way, but in another way, they're quite emotional and relationship oriented. So they're a curious mixture, the French. Well, I'll show you. Here is the results. Don't worry about these colors for now. And, you know, I couldn't fit all the countries on it, obviously. But Germany, they were the most likely to say they'd tell the truth. Maybe not when it comes to Volkswagen, but that was an exception. Sweden, Norway, USA, UK, and then we go down here: Poland, France, Italy, India, China, Russia, Malaysia, Venezuela, Nigeria. Okay. Now, when you ask the people who say they would lie, why would you lie? They said, but if I didn't lie, my best friend would never trust me again. And that is far more important for me. These colors relate to a simple model of culture, which I'll show you. All I will say at the moment is that this blue area, that represents cultures who are what we call rather linear. Now, when this was, oh, and by the way, with Nigerians, I've asked them about this, and they say, yeah, it's true, we'd lie. However, we'd lie if it was in an official court of law. But if it was in our village with the village chieftains and elders, we'd tell the truth because we trust them. Now, the question was asked again, and the second time it was asked, there was one big difference, that the pedestrian died. Any idea what effect that had on the results?
Probably no change in the truth of countries, but I'm wondering whether, say, India, Nigeria, they would flip to the other. So they would
You mean
say the truth
more likely to tell the truth?
because somebody has died? I don't know.
Actually, what happened is that it simply got more polarized. So the cultures who said they'd tell the truth first, when the pedestrian died, even more of them said they'd tell the truth. The cultures who said they would lie, even more of them lied. So what does that tell us? I think that it's under pressure, we tend to revert to cultural type, and it becomes even stronger. Now, if it was your mother who was driving, then, I mean, obviously you probably couldn't be a witness there, but if theoretically, probably more cultured people generally would lie, because then you're down to an even deeper layer than culture. It's down to family. Okay, and of course, everyone is a mix of different cultural groupings. And one definition of culture is that culture is the collective programming of the mind which distinguishes one group of people from another. And we can be members of many different groups. One of them is national, regional. You know, if you take India, for example, the South and the North are very different, as they are in the UK. In the US, many different regional cultures. Any others that you can think of?
Language.
Language, yeah. Any others?
Education or academic.
Yeah. So professional, educational, gender, class, important in some cultures, not in others. Religion, generational. Which generation are you dealing with? I mean, I think it's sometimes a bit of an illusion, because every generation thinks that it's going to be very different. You know, they all are quite surprised. We're all quite surprised when we start turning out more like our parents than we hoped we would. Mark Twain, I remember he said that, you know, when I was a young lad of 14, I could hardly talk to my dad. Now that because he had such stupid ideas, now that I'm 21, you know, it's amazing what he has learned in the last 7 years. So we have to learn it for ourselves, ethnic, corporate, or organizational and personal. Now, have any of you seen the film 12 Angry Men? Yeah, it's from the late 50s, so it's quite an old film, starring Henry Fonda. Very simple plot. A young Puerto Rican is in court and is being accused of murder. And then the jurors, who in this case are all male, they all go into a room, and the whole film is in the jury room. And the only one who believes that the boy is innocent is juror number 8, played by Henry Fonda. During the film, he persuades everyone to change their mind. In a way, he's leading the whole process. How does he do it? By fastening on a layer with each individual where he can connect with them, or connect them with understanding the case. You have to watch it to really get the idea. But it's about leading through making connections with people. And it could be any of these layers that you can make a connection with. Let's just see, there was something in the chat there. Yeah, internet is problematic. I think that was Sally. Yeah, sorry. Okay, so if we move on, those colors, what I was showing with those was 3 different cultural types. In this left-hand corner, we've got what we call linear cultures, and they tend to be cool, factual, decisive planners. Red cultural types would be warm, emotional, very talkative and impulsive. And the reactives, cultural types, would be courteous, amiable, accommodating, compromise. In the middle, we have mediators. And you can apply this to countries, you can apply it to professions, you could apply it to leaders themselves. I mean, many leaders globally, both politically and in organizations, tend to come out quite multi-active because they're very emotionally persuasive. It doesn't mean that there aren't some leaders who are not like this, but that's a typical profile for a leader globally. Where would you put the legal profession here? I mean, if I say we'd put engineers down here in the blue corner, IT people, accountants, sales and marketing up there, academics tend to be quite reactive. Where would you put the legal profession? Anyone?
I'd like to think we're in the middle.
In the middle?
Right? A bit of everything.
Yeah. I think that's probably a good answer, yeah. Somewhere in the middle. I mean, when I thought about this, my instinct would be that solicitors may be a little bit more here, barristers may be a little bit more there. I don't know. It's just probably based more on the movies than anything else. But that was my thoughts about it. I won't go into this in detail. I realise that we're actually running a bit short of time. It's going very quickly. I mean, if people are able to stand at 10 minutes longer, that would be great, because there is quite a bit to go through. But you'll get all these slides afterwards, and this just describes in more detail what the different categories are like. I mean, as leaders, linears are probably very good at planning and structure, sharing information. Multi-actives are the sort of inspirational leader who engages people's emotions. And reactives are more like the strategic leader who, people think that they've done it all themselves, whereas in fact they set the general principles and are, really thinking about things in the background. Yeah, someone has to leave because they've got a meeting. Okay. Others say they could stay on. Yeah, fine. Now, if we look at countries, this is based on our research. Think of this like a map of the London Underground. We've simplified it, but it's showing you where in our research certain countries have more or less come. If you see more than one country on a dot, which in fact is true in nearly all of them, it doesn't mean that those cultures are culturally the same. All it means is that they have a similar balance of qualities. Okay? And then it's also a relative triangle. So, for example, if I take Southeast Asia, I could draw a small triangle in the right-hand corner and say in the left, we've got Singapore, who are like the Germans of Southeast Asia. And, the Filipinos are more like the Spaniards of Southeast Asia. So even though they're generally reactive, relatively, some of them are more multi-active, some of them are more linear. And yeah, when I've got a few days and we're doing it live, I get people to do an assessment on the web beforehand to find out if they are more linear, multi, or reactive. And then I put them in groups for an hour, and I try and get 3 groups, 1 linear, 1 multi, and 1 reactive. And I give them exercises. But obviously we can't do that. But I can show you some photos. And when I show you the photo, just shout out or put in the chat, what cultural type do you think are doing the exercise here? So are these people linear, multi, or reactive just by looking at them?
Are they blue?
Yeah, they are. They're linear. They're blue. Yeah. Quite serious, structured. They're making a list. Closed body language. Look quite focused, don't they? Wearing glasses. So they're linear. Now, this next group, we're given exactly the same instructions. Are they blue, red, or yellow?
Red.
Yeah. Yeah, ever so much red. And, the noise there is incredible. So as a leader, if you go into the room to lead, how would you lead? These people, how would you lead these people? Probably they're expecting different things. And then finally, we've got the reactive room, where what do you see? Well, first of all, 2 of them are Asian. We didn't put them in the group because they were Asian, but because they scored high reactive scores in the assessment, which is what we were expecting anyway. What are the 2 ladies doing? They're listening and taking notes. And reactive cultures, listening is very important for them, listening. If you're leading reactives, one of your jobs is to try and get them to initiate something, to try and get them to speak, particularly working virtually. It can be a challenge. However, remember that they're listening to every word you say and taking notes very often. I'll skip this. This is for you to look afterwards. It's just from a video series that I've worked on recently. It's just come out a few weeks ago. And it's a sort of introduction in a comedy style to the 3 different types, linear, multi, and reactive. If anyone wants to watch it right at the end and we remember, then I can show you, but I'd better skip it for the time being, but you can look it up afterwards. It only lasts about a minute. So what cultural type are you? And we'll do a quick poll on it. So relaunch polling. And let me choose that one. The next one. So which type do you think is closest to you based on what we very quickly looked at? Do you think you personally are more linear, multi-active, reactive, a mix of linear and multi-active, a mix of linear and reactive, a mix of multi and reactive, or an even mix of all 3 types? So 2 more to vote. 5 out of 5, yeah, okay. So here were the results. Those are really interesting results. No one has come across as purely one of the 3 types. We've got 1 saying mix of linear and multi-active, 1 an even mix, and 3 saying a mix of multi and reactive. The reason I find this really interesting is that the mix of multi and reactive is the least common type. It's like, in blood group having, I can't remember the names, but rhesus negativism. It's very uncommon. So it's quite interesting. My own profile is a mix of multi and reactive. So I'm quite interested by that. Yeah, great. But have a think about it. Yeah, please go ahead.
So sorry. Is there a way of actually testing which one you would be? Because this is what we think we are, but is there a way of doing like a survey or something and getting the results?
Well, we've got a survey on the web. I mean, it does cost something. It's I think it's £75 for a license fee, and it's got a lot of other stuff with it, self-study. But the most accurate thing is that when I work with teams, we test. Everyone does the self-assessment, but then we do a mini assessment where everyone assesses in a shorter form each of their colleagues. And then you can see the gaps between how you saw yourself and how others saw you. Interestingly, the results have shown that the person in a team where there's the biggest gap between how they see themselves and how others see them is usually the leader. And when I first saw that, I thought, well, this doesn't sound very good, does it? No one knows who the leader is. But the more I've looked into it, the more I'm coming to the conclusion is that good leaders do adapt to different people. So different people experience them in their own terms. So, for example, you could be a multi-active leader, but you know that when you're dealing with someone linear, you maybe modify your approach a little bit, and so they experience you as less multi-active than you may be really. But it's not an easy topic; it's complex. But you can get some very simple results. You know, for example, I was working one team with a French leader, and he came out as reactive in speaking and listening. So basically, the results showed from his own self-assessment, I listened most of the time. When we looked at the team results, the team all thought that he spoke most of the time. So very simple, but quite illuminating for him. And of course, he's then able to ask, you know, what am I doing wrong? Why do you not think I'm listening? They said, well, you're multitasking. You know, we can be having a meeting with you and you're fiddling with your mobile, sending texts. And he said, okay, I'll promise in the future to show that I'm listening. You know, I was listening, but you obviously didn't perceive that I was listening. And it's that sort of thing which I think improves leadership with people who are different from you. We probably don't have time to go into this as a breakout, but if I just pose the question to you, what do you think we can do when leading different types from ourselves? Any thoughts on things that we could do to adapt, and where are the easiest places to adapt?
I think checking with the team what they need from you. So instead of imposing what you think they need or what comes naturally to you as a leader, asking the team, you know, how can I support you?
Yeah, I think that's a very good answer. And often we don't listen. You know, people often say, "My boss doesn't listen to me." So listen more, obviously. In the chat, someone is saying mirror other styles, listen more, not alpha leadership, collaboration. Yeah, I would agree with all of those. And one of the interesting bits of data that I read recently, and it's good that someone mentioned mirroring, is this. A recent study analyzed 25 million plus words in more than 1,800 publicly available legal documents pertaining to patent infringement lawsuits in the US. They then used a computational linguistic analysis tool to track the writing styles of the judges and lawyers involved. They found that lawyers who mirrored the language of judges in vocabulary, style, and tone had double the chance of winning their case. And it was quite a recent article in the Harvard Business Review, and the BBC published a story, which is why I got it. Only a couple of weeks ago I read about this. So you've got the reference there. It's worth reading it. The article is not that long, but it's extremely interesting and informative. And what we'd say is that by thinking about how you communicate and how the other party communicates, as in these results, can be really useful. And if we look at this, I'll just show you a couple of visual diagrams. I mean, we're nearly done, I suppose, on different styles or patterns of communication. And here we've got what might be typical for Italy. I mean, of course, you may be an Italian who's not like this at all. Northern Italy is quite different. You know, someone from Milan is very different from someone from Sicily, for example, or Naples. I mean, they say that, you know, in Milan, traffic lights are instructions. In Rome, they're suggestions, and in Naples, they're Christmas decorations. You know, it's a very different cultural style. But Italians would tend to expect you to be rather like this. So, you know, you talk a lot, and then if you don't understand, when you clarify things, you talk a lot more. Now, where I live in Finland, it's just the opposite, that, you know, you say very little. And then if the other side says, I didn't understand, then you start summarizing and saying what I meant was A, B, and C. I mean, the women are different from the men. You know, there's the Finnish women are a lot more talkative. There's a story about this Finnish lady, Sirpa, and she says to her husband, Pekka, you know, why do you never tell me that you love me? And Pekka says, 30 years ago, on the day we married, I told you that I loved you. If there's any change in the situation, I will keep you informed. So they are more talkative. Any guesses as to which culture this could be? It's a little bit like a Christmas cracker. Bit of small talk.
Is that the UK?
Yeah, exactly. Who said that?
Oh, it was Nez.
Nez, yeah, absolutely. The UK. Oh, by the way, there was just one minor point that I wanted to mention, which actually means it's the most important thing, sounding reasonable. If there's resistance, then don't panic, use coded speech. That was a very brave idea, wasn't it? In fact, meaning it was a stupid idea, or, you could say that, meaning I wouldn't, an understatement. If there's a deadlock, using humor, vagueness, and then going away, thinking about things, summarizing decision at the next meeting, don't rock the boat. And we do have all these phrases, don't we? Like, interesting idea, what a stupid suggestion. You could say that, as I mentioned. I wouldn't. We must have a meeting about your idea. Forget it. We shall certainly consider it. We won't do it. Not quite with you on that one. That's totally unacceptable. I agree up to a point, probably meaning that I disagree. Then one more. The Americans. I think that's the last one. Americans. It's a bit like a fist or a boxing glove, isn't it? And of course, this is more New York American. Put all the cards on the table, spell it out. Confrontation, provocation. A fight is communication. If you want to get Americans to trust you, have a good verbal fight with them. And time is of the essence, wanting to do things as soon as possible. We don't really have time to go to this, but I'll very briefly just look at it. It's about leadership style. And leadership, of course, it's a huge topic, but what are the things that you need to understand about how leaders operate in different countries, and also how they make decisions? And if you take the country just across the water from me, Sweden is very democratic. They want to involve everyone in decisions. And the yellow one is the boss there. The boss is the first among equals. France, a lot more autocratic, top down. Germany, a combination of top down, but also bottom up. I mean, I'm working with a German company at the moment, and to decide whether they're able to or willing to use my online assessment, they have to ask the Workers' Council. So it's not that the boss can just say, do it. They have to get approval from the what they call the Betriebsrat, the Workers' Council. UK, if you look at the UK there's the boss. Fairly democratic, but a sort of casual style. So where a German boss would go in and say, this is how we're going to do it. You've been doing it wrong. We want you to do it this way. A British boss is likely to come into the team and say, can you fill me in on where we're up to with the project? And then people tell him what they're doing. And he says, yeah, that's an interesting approach. Have you thought about doing it this way? And then the door goes and she goes out and the team say, we've screwed up, haven't we? Simply by this hint or casual way of saying, have you thought about doing it this way? Which, most Brits would then see that as you should have done it a different way. I'm going to finish with this. And then if anyone has any time, feel free to ask some questions. And it's a story. And it's a story about leadership. It's a story about communication. It's a true story, but it's also a metaphor. And if you imagine a plane journey is like a team being led, and you've got the pilot in charge. And I was once on a real flight. We're flying over the Baltic. And we hit terrible turbulence, and the plane's going all over the place, and people were looking worried. And of course, when you communicate in a crisis, that's when you really have to adapt, because as we saw with the car accident, people revert to cultural type in a crisis. Anyway, the pilot came on and spoke in German first, and I speak German, so I understood what he was saying. And he was speaking like an engineer, like an expert. And he said, we've hit wind speeds of 237 kilometers an hour, and that's the reason for this turbulence. But I want to reassure you that we have a very powerful set of Pratt & Whitney engines, and he gave the horsepower. And then he talked about the McDonnell Douglas frame and what pressure it could withstand. And Germans like, when being led, to know what's going to happen next. So he said, I'm going to go down by 7,000 feet. If that doesn't work, I'll do X, Y, and Z. And I could see the Germans calming down, and some Americans on the plane still looking worried because all they'd understood is Pratt & Whitney and McDonnell Douglas. And then I thought, how's he going to do it when he speaks English? And he came on, he spoke perfect American English. And instead of this long, what the Germans call gründlich, thorough explanation, all he said was, well, as you can see, we're on a bit of a roller coaster. So just sit back, tighten your seatbelts, and enjoy the ride. Completely different approach. He was mirroring, he was using the sort of language that he knew that would appeal to Americans. Just get to the point, entertain us. If you tell a joke, then it's fine. Now, a word of warning, British pilots would probably joke even in much worse circumstances, so you're never sure with the Brits. And I was once on a Finnish plane, and we had problems landing, and we were just about to land, and then suddenly it went up again, and the pilot said nothing. And then after a long pause, he said in Finnish, as you can see, we didn't make it. And a long pause again. And this went on and on. Third time we got down, but very little communication. So my main lesson really today is, as a leader, communication is key. When things are difficult, when the going gets tough, communication is even more important. Think about your own style and think about the style of the other party and try and mirror it. And I'd say you'd double your chance of success. So that was a very American way to end. But I'd better stop. I've overrun by a massive amount, but we did start fairly late. And thanks for persisting. But let's get rid of the slides now, and just open it up. If anyone's got any thoughts, questions, feel free to put your mic on.